Hi guys. So today I'm trying to get some fresh air, but also we're going to be talking about kind of our first part of the Civil War as far as strategy goes and things like that. And we're going to be looking at what is known as the Anaconda Plan, which is kind of the North's plan on how to defeat the South at the outbreak of the Civil War. So what you're going to do is you are going to answer the questions and then also provide little summaries that you'll see on the assignment of each section. As always, if you have any questions, just let me know on Big Blue Button or through email. If you want to just tackle this on your own, go ahead and stop me right now. If you want to listen as I read, then you are more than welcome to keep watching. All right. So the first part is just an overview of the plan. It says Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan was the Union's strategic plan to defeat the Confederacy at the start of the American Civil War. The goal was to defeat the rebellion by blockading southern ports, capturing Richmond, Virginia, which had been established as the Confederate capital, and controlling the Mississippi River. This would cut off and isolate the South from the outside world and would prevent their government from functioning. The plan was developed by General Winfield Scott at the beginning of the Civil War, following the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861. The strategic plan would have eventually ended the Civil War, ideally with minimal casualties on both sides. It was a humanitarian way of defeating the rebellion as opposed to invading the South with massive numbers of troops killing, burning, and capturing everything in sight. General Scott's Anaconda Plan was a very passive way of defeating the Confederacy. The problem General Scott had with this idea wasn't with the rebels. His problem was convincing fellow Union commanders that this was a good idea. Pretty much all the Union commanders disliked the plan and referred to it as being too complacent. The tactics that were eventually used were reminiscent of Scott's plan, yet they also involved the horrific combat and many bloody battles. Let's take a deeper look into each of the three steps. Go ahead and pause if you need to. All right, step one, blockading the southern ports. The South felt that cotton was king. Not only did they assume that the war would never happen because of the North's dependence on southern cotton, they also thought that other countries, like Great Britain, would come to the South's aid, if not for help, then surely for trading purposes. The North was well aware of this attitude and decided that blockading southern ports was a necessary first step. This would prevent the South from trading their cotton and thus cripple the economy, preventing them from having the funds to keep the war effort going. At the time, the Northern blockade was the biggest blockade in history. It proved to be very successful. Union ships would fire and turn away any Southern trading vessel trying to go in or out of the ports. New Orleans, Savannah, and Charleston saw their economic output plummet. Within a year, plantations throughout the South began to suffer because they had no place to sell their cotton. The North, Great Britain, and any other buyer was simply cut off due to the blockade. Luckily for the North, Great Britain's navy did not attack the blockade, but instead watched from the sidelines, eager to befriend and establish trade with whichever side won the war. The Confederate States of America did employ some measures to try to counteract this blockade. Most notably, they experimented with submarines to try to sneak past Union ships in the ports. Most of the attempts failed and weren't pursued for a long period of time. The South also combats the blockade by building lighter, faster ships designed to outrun Union ships. These ships were called blockade runners and were able to, on some occasions, do just that. These ships were not enough to get large amounts of cotton to Great Britain to save the Confederate economy. The North's blockade of the South was successful. Also, guys, it wasn't just successful, it was also pretty much instantaneous, right? As soon as they established it, it worked and did exactly what it was supposed to do. All right, go ahead and pause, and then we'll move on to step two. All right, step two, guys, is to take control of the Mississippi River. For generations, the Mississippi River had been more than just a river. It was a lifeline for trade and commerce. It acted as a superhighway traveling the north-south length of the nation. People would use rafts, riverboats, and later steamboats to transport their goods down the river to New Orleans, where they would be shipped anywhere in the world via the ocean. Lincoln and Union generals knew that the South would use the Mississippi to transport weapons, troops, and other supplies up and down the river to assist in war efforts. Also taking the river would stop the Southern commercial vehicles from trading, further hurting the Confederate economy. Preventing this would be very beneficial to the Northern war effort. Also, the Mississippi was an interesting location for the South. It flowed through the heart of the Confederacy. If the Union took control over the river, they would be cutting the western third of the Confederacy off from the rest. Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana all lay west of the river and would become isolated. The Union initially struggled with this objective. General Ulysses S. Grant was in charge of the Northern troops in the Western Front that consisted of battles on or around the Mississippi. Taking the river would center around winning a series of battles in several states that bordered the water. The battles of Shiloh in Tennessee and New Orleans in Louisiana led the North to stake their claim over the river, but it wasn't until the Battle of Vicksburg in the state of Mississippi that would finally allow the North to control the entire river and effectively cut the Confederacy down the middle. Although this process took 2.5 years, it was eventually an achieved objective for the North. Now, 2 out of the 3 steps of the Anaconda Plan was complete. Go ahead and pause, and we'll move on to the last step. All right, step 3 is to take over the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. Once Alabama succeeded in 1861, they invited the other seceding states to join them in their capital of Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery quickly became the acting capital of the Confederate States of America. It is here where they wrote the Confederate Constitution and elected Jefferson Davis as president. Montgomery's 3 hotels were crowded with government officials, politicians, soldiers, and newspapermen. It became more of a metropolis than a quiet village, with its streets crowded with carriages and horses. Everyone admired the small town's beauty, but by May, the summer's humid heat and mosquitoes changed many people's minds about Montgomery. So when the newly seceded Virginians offered their own state capital as the capital of the Confederacy, many were eager to accept the offer. Richmond was a much larger metropolis than Montgomery, and at the heart of the South's industry. It was heavily guarded and provided a much better defensive position, despite the fact that it was geographically much closer to the Union and only 100 miles away from Washington, D.C., the Union's capital. Richmond was a tempting target for the Union. Its capture would hurt the Southern industrial economy, which was small but crucial during wartime, and it would cripple the Confederate government. The Union troops first attempted to capture the city in the very first battle of the war, Bull Run. Throughout the war, the North tried again and again. Each time they were completely unsuccessful and repelled by the opposing army. It wasn't until 1865, when the war was already going badly for the South, that the North was able to capture and burn Richmond. This happened as a direct result of the Union victories elsewhere, which caused Robert E. Lee of the Confederate Army to retreat and leave the capital defenseless. Defense of Richmond was a top priority for the South, and the failure to do so only became possible when the South essentially gave up its protection due to the impending overall surrender. The North's capture of Richmond is successful, but only after 4 years and many casualties trying. Once this step of the Anaconda Plan was completed, the war ended and the United States was whole again. Okay, that's it. Make sure you fill out the last slide there. Also, I believe it asks for the summaries of each event. Make sure you do that as well. And once again, I'll be on Big Blue Button if anybody has any questions, or feel free to reach out and email me.